Phiona Mutesi, the Queen of Katwe, the girl from the slums. The sun rose slowly over Katwe, casting a hazy orange glow across the sprawling slum. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the mingled scents of dust, smoke, and the ever-present stench of the open drainage channels that wound through the settlement like dark, polluted veins. Katwe was alive long before the rest of Kampala stirred. Vendors shouting, children crying, roosters crowing, and the distant rumble of boda-bodas weaving through the narrow streets. In the midst of this chaos lived Phiona Mutesi, a thin, quiet girl with deep, observant eyes. She was 8 years old, though hardship had carved lines into her face that made her seem older. Her family lived in a single-room shack made of rusted tin sheets and scraps of wood. The roof leaked when it rained. The walls rattled in the wind. Rats scurried beneath the floorboards at night. Phiona slept on a thin mat beside her siblings. Every morning she woke before dawn, listening to the rhythmic breathing of her mother, Harriet, who was already preparing for another day of struggle. Harriet was a strong woman, stronger than she ever admitted, but poverty had worn her down. Her hands were calloused from carrying water, her back bent from years of labor, her eyes tired from constant worry. Fiona's father had died years earlier. Her older sister had disappeared, taken by a man who promised work but delivered only suffering. Her brother, Brian, was often sick, his body weakened by malnutrition and untreated infections. Harriet did everything she could to keep her children alive, but survival in Katwe was a daily battle. Breakfast, if it existed at all, was a handful of maize porridge or a piece of cassava. More often, the children went hungry. Phiona learned early not to complain. Hunger was as common as dust in Katwe. After eating, or not eating, Phiona helped her mother fetch water from the communal tap. The line was long, stretching down the street. Women argued, children cried, and the sun beat down mercilessly. The water was not clean, but it was all they had. Phiona balanced the heavy jerry can on her head, her small body straining under the weight. When the chores were done, she walked through the slum, weaving between shacks, stepping over trash heaps, avoiding the older boys who sometimes harassed younger children. She had never been to school. The fees were too high, the uniforms too expensive. She could not read or write. Numbers were a mystery to her, but she was sharp. She noticed everything, the way people moved, the way they spoke, the way they survived. She had a mind built for patterns, though she didn't know it yet. One afternoon, while wandering near the market, she heard something unusual. Laughter, excited voices, a rhythmic tapping sound. It came from behind a small, crumbling church building. Curiosity tugged at her. She followed the sound. Behind the church, in a dusty courtyard, a group of children sat around a long wooden table. On the table were strange boards, black and white squares, and small carved pieces that clicked softly as the children moved them. Phiona had never seen anything like it. Standing among them was a tall, thin man with kind eyes. His clothes were simple, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. His name was Robert Katende, a missionary and volunteer who had started a chess program for the children of Katwe. Phiona watched from a distance, unsure whether she belonged there. The other children noticed her. Some laughed at her torn clothes and bare feet, but Katende did not. He walked toward her, smiling gently. "Would you like to try?" he asked. Phiona hesitated. She looked at the board, at the pieces, at the children who seemed so sure of themselves. She felt the familiar sting of shame, shame for being poor, for being uneducated, for being invisible. But something about the board drew her in. The order, the symmetry, the quiet focus of the players. It was unlike anything in Katwe. She nodded. Katende pulled out a chair. Phiona sat down, her heart pounding. The board felt cold beneath her fingers. The pieces were smooth, worn from years of use. This, Katende said, holding up a small pawn, is the pawn. It starts small, but if it reaches the other side of the board, it can become a queen. A queen. The word echoed in Fiona's mind. In Katwe, queens did not exist. Girls grew up to carry water, sell vegetables, raise children, and fight to survive. But here, on this board, a small, powerless piece could become the most powerful of all. Fiona's eyes widened. She played her first game that day. She lost quickly. Then she played again, and again, and again. Each time she lasted a little longer. Each time she understood a little more. Katende watched her closely. He saw something in her. A spark, a hunger, a rare ability to see patterns and possibilities. When the sun began to set, the other children drifted home. But Phiona stayed, staring at the board as if it held the secrets of the universe. Finally, Katende said, "You can come back tomorrow, if you like." Phiona nodded eagerly. As she walked home through the darkening streets, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. A small, fragile hope, but hope nonetheless. She didn't know it yet, but that day would change her life forever. The game that changed everything. The days that followed Phiona's first encounter with chess felt different from anything she had ever known. Each morning she woke with a sense of anticipation, a quiet excitement that pushed aside the usual heaviness of hunger and worry. She hurried through her chores, fetching water, sweeping the dirt floor of their shack, helping her mother prepare whatever food they had, so she could return to the small courtyard behind the church. The chess program became her refuge. The dusty wooden table, the mismatched pieces, the laughter and arguments of the children. It all felt like a world separate from Katwe's harsh reality. Here the rules were clear. The board was fair. The pieces moved with purpose. And for the first time in her life, Phiona felt she had control over something. Robert Katende noticed her dedication immediately. While other children came and went, Phiona stayed. She arrived early, left late, and absorbed every lesson with an intensity that surprised even him. She asked questions constantly about openings, about tactics, about why certain moves worked and others didn't. She replayed games in her mind long after the board had been cleared. But outside the courtyard, life remained brutally difficult. Struggles at home. Harriet watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and fear. She saw the spark in Phiona's eyes, the way she rushed out the door each afternoon. But she also saw the empty food containers, the unpaid bills, the growing pile of worries that chess could not solve. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the shacks and the air cooled, Harriet sat beside Phiona on the floor of their home. The room was dim, lit only by a small kerosene lamp. "Phiona," she said softly, "this game, it takes so much of your time." Phiona looked up, her fingers still tracing imaginary moves on the floor. "I like it," she whispered. "Harriet, liking something doesn't fill our stomachs." Phiona lowered her gaze. She knew her mother was right, but she also knew that chess made her feel alive in a way nothing else ever had. Harriet reached out and touched her daughter's cheek. "Just don't forget where we live. Dreams are dangerous here." Phiona nodded, though she didn't fully understand. She only knew that she wanted to return to the board the next day. A growing talent. As weeks turned into months, Phiona's skill grew rapidly. She began defeating the younger children, then the older ones, then even some of the boys who had been playing for years. Her style was bold, intuitive, and fearless. She saw patterns others missed. She anticipated moves before they happened. She played with a quiet intensity that made even the most confident players uneasy. Katende watched her progress with amazement. He had taught many children over the years, but none had learned as quickly or as naturally as Phiona. She had a gift, one that could take her far beyond the boundaries of Katwe. One afternoon, after she won yet another game against an older boy, Katende pulled her aside. "Phiona," he said, "have you ever thought about competing?" She frowned. "Competing?" "In a tournament, against players from other schools." Phiona's stomach tightened. She had never been inside a school, let alone competed against students who wore clean uniforms and spoke English fluently. "I don't belong there," she murmured. Katende shook his head. "You belong anywhere your mind can take you." But Phiona wasn't convinced. The world outside Katwe felt too big, too bright, too full of people who would see her as nothing more than a poor girl from the slums. Still, the idea lingered in her mind. The first tournament. The day of the local tournament arrived sooner than she expected. Katende had insisted she participate. He believed in her more than she believed in herself. Phiona wore her cleanest clothes, a faded skirt and a shirt with a missing button. She had no shoes. Her feet were calloused from years of walking barefoot on hot pavement and sharp stones. When she arrived at the tournament hall, she felt every pair of eyes on her. The room was bright and spacious, with rows of tables covered in crisp, white cloths. Children in neat uniforms sat confidently at the boards, chatting and laughing. Their parents stood nearby, offering encouragement. Phiona felt small, out of place. She wanted to turn around and run back to Katwe, but Katende placed a hand on her shoulder. "Remember," he said gently, "the board is the same everywhere." She nodded, though her heart pounded in her chest. Her first opponent was a boy with polished shoes and a crisp collar. He looked at her bare feet and smirked. "You're playing?" he asked. Phiona didn't answer. She sat down, her hands trembling slightly. The game began. At first, she struggled. The noise, the unfamiliar surroundings, the pressure, it all overwhelmed her. But as the game progressed, something shifted. The world faded away. The board came into focus. The pieces moved with clarity. She saw patterns, traps, opportunities. She won. The boy stared at the board in disbelief. Her second game was easier, her third even more so. With each victory, her confidence grew. The other children began to whisper about the barefoot girl from Katwe who was defeating everyone. By the time she reached the final round, a small crowd had gathered around her table. Her opponent was the tournament favorite, a boy who had been playing since he was 5, coached by professionals, supported by a wealthy family. The game was long and tense. The boy played aggressively, trying to intimidate her, but Phiona remained calm. She waited. She watched. She struck when the moment was right. A final move. A quiet whisper. Checkmate. The room erupted in murmurs. Katende smiled proudly. The boy stared at the board, stunned. Phiona had won. A new sense of possibility. When she returned to Katwe that evening, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the narrow streets. Children ran beside her, shouting her name. Her mother stood outside their shack, confusion turning to pride as she saw the small medal hanging around Phiona's neck. "You won?" Harriet asked softly. Phiona nodded. Harriet pulled her into a tight embrace. For a moment, the weight of poverty, hunger, and fear seemed to lift. That night, as Phiona lay on her mat, she stared at the ceiling and thought about the day. She thought about the board, the moves, the victory. She thought about the world beyond Katwe, a world she had glimpsed for the first time. And for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to dream. Rising beyond Katwe. The weeks after the local tournament felt like a dream to Phiona. Children in Katwe whispered her name as she passed. Some pointed at her medal. Others asked her to teach them moves. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as a poor girl, not as a burden, not as someone struggling to survive, but as someone with talent, someone with potential. But life in Katwe did not change simply because she had won a chess tournament. The slum remained the same, crowded, chaotic, unforgiving. The smell of burning garbage still hung in the air. The drainage channels still overflowed when it rained. Hunger still gnawed at her stomach, and her mother still worried constantly about how to feed the family. Chess had given Phiona hope, but hope did not fill empty bowls. One evening, after a long day of chores and chess practice, Phiona returned home to find her mother sitting outside their shack, her face buried in her hands. The sky was darkening, and the air smelled of rain. "Ma?" Phiona asked softly. Harriet looked up, her eyes red. "We have no money for food tomorrow," she whispered. "I don't know what to do." Phiona felt a familiar ache in her chest. She sat beside her mother, unsure of what to say. She wished she could trade her medal for a sack of maize. She wished she could turn her victories into meals. Harriet reached out and took her daughter's hand. "I'm proud of you," she said, "but pride doesn't feed us." Phiona lowered her gaze. She knew her mother wasn't trying to hurt her. Harriet was simply tired, tired of fighting, tired of hoping, tired of losing. That night, Phiona lay awake on her mat, listening to the rain hammering the tin roof. She thought about the chessboard, about the pieces, about the way the pawn could become a queen. She wondered if she could ever become something more than a girl from Katwe. Katende's vision. Robert Katende saw the struggle in her eyes. He saw the hunger, the exhaustion, the fear of dreaming too big. But he also saw something else, something rare. He saw a mind that could change her life. One afternoon after practice, he called her aside. "Phiona," he said gently, There is another tournament coming, a bigger one, the National Junior Championship. Phiona froze. The National Championship? That meant competing against the best players in Uganda, children from wealthy families, private schools, and elite chess clubs. I can't go, she whispered. I don't belong there. Katende shook his head. You belong anywhere your talent takes you. But I have no shoes, she said quietly. No uniform. No money. Katende smiled. Those are things we can solve. He spoke with the confidence of a man who had faced hardship himself. He had grown up in poverty, played soccer barefoot, and worked his way through school. He understood what it meant to fight for every opportunity. We will find a way, he said, and he meant it. Preparing for the Nationals. The weeks leading up to the national championship were intense. Katende trained Phiona every day, teaching her advanced strategies, endgame techniques, and how to stay calm under pressure. He pushed her harder than ever before, but always with kindness. You have a gift, he told her, but talent is not enough. You must work harder than everyone else. Phiona listened. She practiced for hours, replaying games in her mind, studying positions, analyzing mistakes. She played against older boys, against Katende himself, against anyone who would sit across from her. At home, Harriet watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and fear. She wanted to support her, but she also worried that the world outside Katwe would crush her spirit. One evening, Harriet said, "Be careful, Phiona. The higher you climb, the harder you can fall." Phiona nodded. She understood the risk, but she also understood something else. If she didn't try, she would never escape the life she had been born into. The journey to Kampala. The morning of the national championship, Phiona woke before dawn. She wore the same faded clothes she always wore. Katende's wife had given her a pair of shoes, slightly too big, but clean. She felt strange wearing them, as if she were pretending to be someone else. The journey to Kampala was long. The bus was crowded, hot, and noisy. Phiona stared out the window, watching the city grow larger and more intimidating. Tall buildings, paved roads, cars, shops, everything felt foreign. When they arrived at the tournament hall, her breath caught in her throat. The building was enormous, with polished floors and bright lights. Children in crisp uniforms walked confidently through the halls. Their parents carried bags of snacks, water bottles, and notebooks filled with chess strategies. Phiona felt small, invisible, out of place. But Katende placed a hand on her shoulder. "Remember," he said, "the board is the same everywhere." She nodded, though her heart pounded. The National Championship. Her first game was against a boy from a prestigious school. He looked at her shoes, her clothes, her nervous posture, and smirked. "You're from Katwe?" he asked. Phiona didn't answer. She sat down and focused on the board. The game began. At first, she struggled. She saw patterns, traps, opportunities. She saw patterns, traps, opportunities. She won. Her second game was easier, her third even more so. With each victory, her confidence grew. The whispers began again, just like at the local tournament. "Who is she? She's beating everyone. She's from Katwe?" By the final round, a crowd had gathered around her table. Her opponent was the reigning champion, a boy who had been playing since he was 5, coached by professionals, supported by wealthy parents. The game was long and tense. The boy played aggressively, trying to intimidate her. But Phiona remained calm. She waited. She watched. She struck when the moment was right. A final move. A quiet whisper. Checkmate. The room erupted in murmurs. Katende smiled proudly. The boy stared at the board, stunned. Phiona had won the National Junior Championship. A new world opens. When she returned to Katwe, the entire community celebrated. Children ran beside her, shouting her name. Mothers smiled. Fathers nodded with respect. Harriet embraced her tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "My daughter, you did it." For the first time, Phiona felt something she had never felt before. Possibility. She had stepped beyond the boundaries of Katwe, and the world had not crushed her. It had opened. The world beyond Katwe. Winning the National Junior Championship changed everything, and yet, in many ways, nothing changed at all. Katwe remained the same: the narrow alleys, the rusted tin roofs, the smell of smoke and sewage, the constant hum of survival. But inside Phiona, something had shifted. She had glimpsed a world beyond the slum, a world where her mind, not her circumstances, defined her worth. Still, the challenges of daily life did not disappear. Hunger still gnawed at her stomach. Her mother still struggled to pay rent. Her brother Brian's health still wavered, and the fear of losing everything still hung over the family like a shadow. But now, there was also something else: opportunity, a new kind of attention. Word of Phiona's victory spread quickly. People from outside Katwe began to take notice. Teachers, journalists, even government officials. Some came to the slum to meet her, stepping carefully through the muddy alleys, shocked by the poverty they saw. One reporter asked her, "How did you learn to play so well?" Phiona shrugged. "I just see the moves." Another asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe a champion." But attention was a double-edged sword. Some people praised her. Others doubted her. Some said she was lucky. Others said she didn't deserve the opportunities she was getting. Harriet watched all of this with caution. She had seen how quickly hope could turn into disappointment. She didn't want her daughter to be hurt by a world that didn't understand Katwe. But she also saw the fire in Phiona's eyes, the determination, the hunger for something more. And she could not extinguish that flame. The invitation. One afternoon, Katende arrived at their home with news that left the entire family speechless. "Phiona," he said, "you've been invited to represent Uganda at the African International Children's Chess Tournament in Sudan." Phiona stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Sudan," she whispered. "Another country?" Katende nodded. "You'll need a passport and a birth certificate." Phiona's heart sank. She had neither. Like many children in Katwe, she had never been officially registered at birth. She existed, but not on paper. Harriet's face tightened with worry. "We cannot afford these things," she said. Katende shook his head. "We will find a way." And he did. He spent days navigating government offices, filling out forms, pleading with officials, explaining Phiona's situation. He used his own money to pay fees. He stood in long lines under the scorching sun. He refused to give up. Finally, after weeks of effort, Phiona held a small blue booklet in her hands. Her first passport. She stared at it for a long time, tracing the letters with her finger. It felt unreal, like holding a key to a world she had never imagined. Leaving Uganda. The day of departure arrived. Phiona had never been on a plane. She had never been inside an airport. She had never left Kampala, let alone Uganda. Everything felt overwhelming. The crowds, the announcements, the bright lights, the security checks. When the plane lifted off the ground, her stomach lurched. She grabbed the armrest, eyes wide. Katende smiled. "It's just like a bus," he said. "Only higher." Phiona pressed her face to the window. The city shrank beneath them. The slums, the markets, the roads, all became tiny dots. For the first time, she saw her world from above. It looked small, fragile, beautiful. She wondered what else lay beyond the horizon. The international tournament. Sudan was hot, dry, and unfamiliar. The tournament hall was enormous, filled with children from across Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt. They wore colorful uniforms, carried expensive chess sets, and spoke languages Phiona didn't understand. She felt out of place again. Her clothes were simple. Her English was limited. Her confidence wavered. But when she sat at the board, everything changed. The pieces were the same. The rules were the same. The patterns were the same. Her first opponent underestimated her. She won quickly. Her second opponent played aggressively. She countered calmly. Her third opponent was older, taller, more experienced, but she saw through his strategy. She won again. By the end of the tournament, she had placed among the top players. She had not won the championship, but she had proven that she belonged on the international stage. When she returned to Uganda, she was greeted like a hero. The struggle continues. But success did not erase hardship. One night, heavy rains flooded Katwe. Water poured into their home, soaking their mats, their clothes, their few possessions. Harriet tried to sweep the water out with a broken broom, but it kept coming. Phiona stood in the doorway, watching the rain fall through the holes in the roof. She felt helpless. She could win tournaments, travel to other countries, defeat the best players in Africa, but she could not stop the rain from destroying their home. She realized then that chess alone could not save her family, but it could open doors, and she would walk through every single one. The Olympiad. Months later, Katende brought more news. "Phiona," he said, "you've been selected to represent Uganda at the Chess Olympiad in Russia." Russia. Snow. Cold. A world she had only seen in pictures. Phiona felt dizzy. She had never imagined going so far from home. The journey was long and exhausting. The cold was unlike anything she had ever felt. The buildings were enormous, the streets wide, the people pale and bundled in thick coats. At the Olympiad, she faced players from Europe, Asia, the Americas, children who had grown up with coaches, computers, and years of training. She lost some games, she won others, but every move she made was a victory in itself. a girl from Katwe, sitting among the world's best. She was no longer invisible. Becoming the Queen of Katwe. When she returned home, the entire slum celebrated. Children ran beside her, chanting her name. Mothers hugged her. Fathers shook her hand. Harriet cried openly, overwhelmed with pride. "You have gone farther than I ever dreamed," she whispered. Phiona looked around at the narrow streets, the rusted roofs, the muddy alleys. She saw the children who looked up to her, the mothers who hoped for a better future, the families who struggled every day. She realized that her journey was not just her own. She carried Katwe with her everywhere she went, and she would keep climbing, keep fighting, keep dreaming, because she knew now, with absolute certainty, that even a pawn from the poorest slum could become a queen.